Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, today it's a particularly interesting topic that we're starting with this morning on Sunrise Daily. Well, yes, as we build up to the elections, there'll be lots and lots required of the will-be leaders, those who we will eventually elect to lead us for the next 4 years. But then we also, on hand, have our own responsibilities cut out for us. So we look at both dynamics. We're joined now by Mr. Tokunbo Obanya, who is a leadership consultant, to take us through some of this morning. And thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
Well, yes, you hold a lot of consultations and programs, seminars about leadership, and but now perhaps it's just about that big stage when Nigerians will eventually go ahead and elect who will lead us for the next 4 years. But let's take a look at some of the issues that perhaps you expect to see the leaders, maybe the way they conduct themselves, the kind of things they say, expectations from us about our leaders. How should we even approach this?
I don't know. I think it's a difficult issue to look at, basically, because we're not, as it were, one homogeneous nation. I think that's been one of our challenges. As a nation, we have two major groups. We have the elites, and then we have the bulk of the people who really have no idea what leadership is supposed to mean, and who think of things in terms of subsistence issues, and day-to-day, what happens, how they get fed each day, and what happens to them on a short-term basis. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that the elite thought differently too. But we also have a situation where the elite themselves are almost at the same thinking level. The only thing is that they're probably a little more educated. So I think it creates a number of challenges for us as a nation. First of all, one of the big challenges is when we look at the kind of men we want, do we have an idea of what we need first before we even look at what we want? You see, when you look at one of our big challenges as a nation is that we really have a misconceived idea of what leadership means. And we therefore think leadership is almost like a bestowal of a crown and an achievement of a chieftaincy, something in the same light. It's almost the same way we look at titles. As far as Nigerians are concerned, titles are actually more important than the assignment. And you find that pervading almost everybody, including the educated ones, strangely enough. Nigerians want to be professors, they don't want to do the work. They want to be called doctors. They don't want to apply themselves in the hospitals. They want increase in salaries. They don't want to do that. So we have a foundational problem when it comes to it. And so there's a danger that those of us who are like leadership experts, and that's what I'm trying to avoid, have a tendency to wanting to talk of what it should be rather than what it is. And sometimes if you don't recognize the gap between what is and what it should be, it becomes very difficult for us to begin to drive for a solution in the direction of what we need to do.
Well, that will be your challenge as a leadership consultant. I mean, when you're addressing a gathering or meeting or whatever it is, a conference, I imagine that will be your greatest challenge, identifying what the needs of a particular group of people are and where they should be going. Yes. But generally speaking, what do you find as the greatest challenge of the people who attend those conferences?
Actually, the first big challenge, I've always said it, and I've said it here on channels, that I find that when we're dealing with leadership, there are two big flaws in leadership, or two kinds of bad leaders, let me put it that way. I say there are the malevolent, which are people who maybe they're psychotic, maybe they have social issues, maybe they have upbringing issues that have led to them having no value systems, and they are fundamentally dangerous. And then there are the ignorant. And my observation, actually, from years of working with people and building leaders, is that the ignorant far outnumber the malevolent. They so far outnumber the malevolent as to almost make them non-relevant, except for the fact that when a person is ignorant, he almost behaves as badly as the person who is bad. Fundamentally, it's like I always say that there's no difference between the man who cannot read and the man who does not read. They're both equally ignorant. And although one has a capacity, the fact that his capacity is not applied means that you don't get any results. Now, one of the challenges we find a lot of the times is that a lot of people have this presumption of understanding of what leadership is. I have found out over the years that as we run programs, the most interesting thing to discover is that you begin to see people's eyes open as they suddenly begin to realize that they didn't really understand where they stood. Because there's nothing wrong. Miles Monroe, the late Miles Monroe used to say that if you don't understand the purpose of a thing, abuse is inevitable. And you're having a lot of people who really don't understand what it is to be leaders. And not just, unfortunately, if we could identify it as just leadership, it would be easy. But actually, I have discovered that the biggest challenge we have as a nation, and it just, when it gets to leadership, it kind of crystallizes, is the fact that a typical Nigerian does not spend his time asking the reason for the actions or the situations where he's in. For example, you're a teacher. And take as an example, let's start from the basic. A teacher does not start by trying to say, what is my responsibility? Why does a teacher exist? Why do I therefore have to fulfill that role? It's when he doesn't understand that, it then leads to a lot of other things that snowball down the line. Or you take a doctor. I find it, for example, difficult, even though I have a lot of friends who are doctors, to understand how, even if I was on a strike because I wanted government to increase my fee, I would see a human being die and be unable to take care of it. Because I'm asking myself the question, why am I a doctor, first of all? Why did I didn't go to the 7 years in school because I wanted to find a living. Because if you wanted to do that, you could go and start selling and importing containers from Hong Kong. It's easier to do that for a living. I went there because I recognized that in society, people were likely to be dying. Without my intervention, I wouldn't be able to save their lives. But because we do not have a process, often, of asking ourselves why we do the things we do, it's a fundamental issue as a nation. So you find that people in Nigeria get appointed to leadership positions. They want to run for governor. I remember once, funny, it might be a humorous story, but it was true. In 1983-82 election, just before the Buhari administration came in the first time, they asked the candidate in Kwara why he was running for governor. And he said, to be famous. And he said he's on radio. And they asked him, what do you mean by to be famous? He said, well, is it not because I'm running for governor that you're interviewing me on radio now? That if I was in my house, you wouldn't interview me. And he was running for governor of a state. And he was not an illiterate. So he did not even say, my objective is to improve the quality of lives of our people. Is that really his objective?
Or maybe he wasn't lying. Maybe he was just being truthful.
I thought he was. No, he was actually. You wouldn't make that kind of statement without being truthful because it's outrageous. But he meant that that's why he was. A lot of people, my people have asked me to come and do what? When you finally arrive at the place, what would you do with it? Are you like a dog chasing a car? When you get to the car, a typical Nigerian starts work as a teacher. He wants to be a principal one day. He starts work as an engineer. He wants to be director of engineering. What does the director of engineering do other than have an increase in salary, better parks, better office, big table, man at the top? If that's all that the job entails, and he gets there, and what you end up finding out in many situations is that the engineer grade 2 becomes the director of engineering, but actually he's just a senior engineer grade 2.
So it points to the fact that we carry out activities without a purpose. Is that what you're saying?
That's been my major observation. She asked the question, she said, what do I find as a bigger problem is that most of the time we don't understand the purpose of our assignment.
The purpose of the right purpose, because when they get in there, they definitely have a purpose, but perhaps maybe not the one that will suit the people or the reason for which they were really elected.
I think the reason is because when you don't have a clear-cut purpose or a vision or a clear-cut idea, what happens is that you make up the ones that are immediately satisfying. Let me give an example. Just take an example from a personal example for my dad, for example. When my dad came out of University College Ibadan in those days, being one of only a few graduates from the north, he had 3 job offers. A management job, 2 management jobs in oil companies, and 1 as an education officer in another Nigerian civil service. But he said at the time, and when I asked him, he said this, that there were many young Nigerians, especially in the northern part of the country, who had nobody to give them an idea of what their future could be like. And they needed people like him, who were a little bit ahead of them, to become guides to them. So he took the lower paying job because it gave him an opportunity to influence a generation. Now for him, therefore, all his life, that's what he ended up living by. Because now he had a clear objective of the fact that I am in the world to make a contribution. That's what I mean by the purpose. But if, for example, you work like most Nigerians do to earn a salary, and if that's all you mean, it therefore means that our levels of thinking are rudimentary or pedantry.
If I may come in here.
Yes.
Do you not think that the issue of definition might have affected the issue of purpose? For instance, some people might not exactly understand what leadership means. Yes. So they go in there and they just think it's just position.
Yeah, actually the two overlap. The issue of definition ultimately determines and affects the issue of purpose. If, for example, you don't know what something is, then likely, if you walk into a room and you saw this sheet of paper and you couldn't read, and to you it works as a fan, it becomes a fan because your lack of understanding of what it is then affects what you think its purpose is. I find that one of the biggest challenges you have when it comes to leadership, which is, you just hit it on the head, is the issue of definition. For example, what is a leader? And if you ask what's a leader, and the person who is aspiring for a leadership position has not answered the question to himself of what a leader really is, definition, then he's unlikely to be seeking for the purpose of leadership. He is likely to do one of two things. One, he will either look at somebody he admires and copy the person, mimic the person, and he could turn out to be a little bit right in some situations, or he will make it up as he goes along. And when he makes it up as he goes along, it means that he finds himself being tossed about by every wind of pressure, and there are many when you get into leadership.